Chapter 1. The Weight of Moss and Whispers. The rain in the imperial city of Jing was a persistent, sullen thing, clinging to the slate roofs and slicking the cobblestones into treacherous mirrors. It mirrored, perhaps, the mood of Kaelen Vane, or rather, what he was, or rather, what he pretended to be, a hunchbacked gardener, perpetually stained with mud and the ghosts of forgotten blossoms. The damp clung to him like a second skin, a necessary camouflage in this city built on ambition and indifference. He knelt amidst the skeletal remains of the Shrine of the Silent Bloom, its crumbling walls choked with tenacious weeds. The shrine, once a vibrant offering point to the forest spirits, was now a testament to neglect, a small pocket of wildness ignored by the sprawling, meticulously planned city. Kaelen tended to it with a meticulousness that bordered on reverence, coaxing life from the stubborn earth with hands roughened by years of labor he hadn't chosen, but one that felt strangely like a purpose. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and the faintest trace of lavender, a scent Elara, the disgraced herbalist, occasionally brought, offering him a small, wrinkled pouch as a gesture of friendship. He didn't begrudge her the offering. Every scrap of kindness felt precious in this place. He was attempting to revive a cluster of jade orchids, their leaves drooping listlessly. He traced a finger along a brittle stem, murmuring in a low, rhythmic cadence, not words exactly, but a feeling, a gentle urging. He was listening not to the wind, but to the pulse of the earth beneath him, a skill honed over decades, a legacy he desperately tried to bury. The sounds of the city were a discordant symphony of cartwheels, shouting vendors, and the relentless hammering of construction. But here, in the shadow of the shrine, the noise faded, replaced by a quiet hum, the vibration of roots beneath stone, the slow, patient breath of the earth. He was connected to it, a conduit, a silent observer. It was a comfort, a burden, and a deadly secret. Just then, the familiar taunts echoed across the mud-slicked courtyard. Look at him, scrubbing at the dirt. Honestly, you did think he'd been born in a pigsty. It was Caspian Hektor, Lord Hektor's son, a boy barely 17, but already saturated with the arrogance of wealth and power. He stood leaning against a half-built section of the carriage path, a swirl of silk and disdain, his steel rapier glinting in the weak sunlight. He gestured with the butt of his rapier towards Kaelen's hands, caked with mud from his meticulous weeding. These are the hands of a slave gardener. Fitting, would you say? Kaelen didn't rise. He simply continued to tend the orchids, a deliberate silence radiating from him. The subtle shift in the air, the almost imperceptible ripple in the damp earth, betrayed a tension he fought to contain. You know, Caspian continued, enjoying the spectacle, my father says you're a blight, a reminder of the ugliness that resists the progress of civilization. He calls you a weed. He kicked at a loose stone, sending it skittering across the courtyard. And you, gardener, are a particularly stubborn weed. Another figure appeared, a burly guard, clearly sent to enforce the Lord's displeasure. He stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Clean yourself up, peasant. This place is an insult to the Imperial Palace. That's when Kaelen felt it, a prickling at the back of his mind, a sharpening of his senses. The earth thrummed with an undeniable urgency, a discordant note in its usual harmony. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to warn. The shift began subtly, almost unnoticed. He placed a single, calloused palm, flat on the ground, directly over the roots of the ancient great cedar, a venerable tree that had anchored the district's water table for centuries. It was a gesture ingrained in him since childhood, a silent invocation to the spirits of the forest. Then it began. The earth shifted, not with a tremor, but with a sudden, violent surge. The air grew thick with a strange green energy. The guard instinctively recoiled. Caspian's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. Kaelen moved. not with the jerky, unnatural movements of a man struggling to control an immense power, but with the fluid grace of a vine responding to the wind. In a heartbeat, he was a blur of motion, disarming the guard with a precise strike to the wrist, his wooden trowel spinning through the air like a lethal extension of his arm. Before Caspian could even draw his rapier, the steel dissolved into a fine, shimmering dust, consumed by the raw, untamed power emanating from Kaelen. The ground erupted in a whirlwind of roots and earth, a miniature storm of vegetative fury. The air crackled with energy, the scent of wet earth amplified tenfold. It wasn't an act of violence, not entirely. It was a demonstration, a quiet, devastating assertion of a power that was both ancient and terrifying. The attackers, utterly bewildered, scrambled backward, their bravado replaced by a primal instinct to flee. Kaelen ceased his movement, the energy receding like a tide. He stood amidst the chaos, covered in mud and leaves, his face impassive. The only evidence of the brief, terrifying display was the shattered remains of the guard's sword and the stunned faces of the onlookers. "You are not a gardener," a voice whispered, thin and hesitant. It was Alara, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and understanding. "You are the sovereign of the forest." Chapter 2. Roots of Revelation. The aftermath of the Blooming Moon Festival hung thick in the air, a heady mix of fear, disbelief, and the pungent aroma of pulverized steel and disturbed earth. Lord Hektor, his face the color of a bruised plum, stood frozen before Kaelen, flanked by a handful of his remaining guards, each one nursing a bruised ego and a rapidly dissipating sense of authority. Caspian, predictably, was a sputtering mess of outrage and humiliation, his silk robes stained with mud and the ghostly residue of vanished steel. The initial chaos had quickly devolved into a hushed, apprehensive murmur. The Imperial Palace guards, normally a force of imposing order, were visibly shaken. They'd witnessed something that defied logic. Something that suggested the ancient beliefs whispered about in the Imperial Library. The legends of the Verdant Pulse were not merely myth. Kaelen, meanwhile, was calmly gathering his tools, meticulously wiping the mud from his worn leather gloves. The scene felt surreal, like a fever dream. He had anticipated a confrontation, a desperate act of defense. He had planned for a chaotic brawl, for perhaps a few bruises. He had not planned for the earth to literally respond to his will. This is madness," Hektor sputtered, his voice strained. "You are a commoner, a fool. You possess no right to disrupt the orders of the crown." Kaelen didn't meet his gaze. "The crown has allowed the desecration of sacred ground. That confers a certain responsibility." His voice was low, resonant, carrying a subtle undercurrent of power that seemed to vibrate in the very air. Before Hektor could recover his composure, a wave of Imperial officials, led by the stern Magistrate Lyn, arrived. Magistrate Lyn, Kaelen's mother, was a woman renowned for her ruthlessness and political acumen. Her arrival was a calculated move, a demonstration of Imperial power. She surveyed the scene, her expression unreadable, her hand resting on the hilt of her ceremonial dagger. "Kaelen Vane," she addressed him, her voice sharp and controlled. "Explain yourself. This spectacle is unacceptable. You are to be apprehended and brought before the council for questioning." Kaelen offered no resistance. He simply gestured to a squad of guards, instructing them to secure the area. As they moved to detain him, he turned to Alara, who had remained rooted to the spot, her eyes fixed on him with an almost devotional intensity. "You were brave, Alara," he said, his voice softer now. "You risked your life to protect something precious." He offered her a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a symbol of rebirth and hope. "Take this, a token of gratitude." As the Imperial guards moved to seize him, a ripple of green energy, faint but undeniably present, emanated from Kaelen once more. It wasn't the explosive eruption of the previous night. This was a subtle, controlled release, like a pulse of life. The guards nearest to him instinctively recoiled, a shared tremor running through their ranks. "Don't move," Kaelen commanded, his voice gaining an edge. "Observe." He knelt down, his hand hovering over the newly exposed soil. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of concentration. The air around him grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and profoundly powerful, the scent of the Verdant Pulse. Suddenly the ground beneath him began to shift. Not violently, but with a slow, deliberate motion, as if guided by an unseen hand. Roots, thick as a man's torso, snaked out from the earth, forming intricate patterns, weaving through the fallen stones and broken flagstones. The earth pulsed with a vibrant green light, illuminating the faces of the stunned onlookers. Caspian, witnessing this, let out a strangled cry of terror. He instinctively reached for his rapier, but it was too late. The roots encircled him, gently but firmly, binding his limbs. He struggled, panicked, but the roots held fast, unyielding. "You cannot control the earth, Caspian," Kaelen said, his voice laced with pity. "It is not a weapon to be wielded, but a force to be understood. A partner." As the roots tightened their grip, a strange, almost musical hum filled the air. It was a sound that resonated deep within the bones, a vibration that seemed to unlock something primal within those who heard it. The imperial officials, even Magistrate Lin, visibly recoiled, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the display ceased. The roots retreated back into the earth, the green light faded, and Caspian was left bound and helpless, his arrogance shattered. "You possess a remarkable gift, Kaelen," Magistrate Lin said, her voice regaining its characteristic steel. "A dangerous gift. You will be brought before the council, and we will determine the extent of your capabilities. But know this, the Empire will not tolerate such displays of unchecked power." Turning to Ilara, she added, "And you, herbalist, you will remain under observation. Your understanding of this young man will be of great interest." Kaelen met Ilara's gaze, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "Let us begin," he said, extending a hand towards her. "Let us learn the secrets held within the earth." Chapter 3. The Whispers of Jade. The council's summons was swift and brutal. The Grand Magistrate Lin, a woman whose reputation preceded her like a storm cloud, sharp, decisive, and utterly ruthless, personally escorted Kaelen to the obsidian chamber, a space carved deep within the Imperial Citadel's heart, used only for the most sensitive matters. The chamber itself felt oppressive, the polished black stone amplifying every rustle of silk and hushed word. Around a circular table of obsidian sat the Council of Five, the Imperial Advisor, the head of the military, the Grand Treasurer, the Keeper of Records, and the enigmatic Shadow Weaver, a figure shrouded in rumor and said to possess unsettling precognitive abilities. Kaelen, still faintly flushed from his impromptu display of power, stood before them, his simple gardener's tunic feeling acutely out of place. Had been stripped of all personal possessions, even the worn leather pouch containing his tools, and his hands were bound with silk restraints, a deliberate humiliation designed to further diminish his presence. "Kaelen Vane," Magistrate Lin began, her voice a low rumble, "you demonstrated a power that rivals the gods. You manipulated the very earth beneath our feet, rendering our guards powerless. This is not a mere display of martial skill. This is defiance against the natural order, and a blatant assertion of sovereignty. Explain yourself." Kaelen remained silent for a long moment, observing the council. He noted the subtle shift in their expressions, a flicker of fear in the eyes of the military head, a cool calculation from the treasurer, a deep frown from the Keeper of Records, and most unsettlingly, a flicker of something akin to recognition within the Shadow Weaver's hooded gaze. He understood that this wasn't simply a legal proceeding, it was an assessment. "I sought to prevent destruction," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "Lord Hektor intends to obliterate the shrine, to pave over the history of this land, and to diminish the lifeblood of this district. The Great Cedar provides the water for the entire slum. Its removal would be an act of unparalleled folly, a wound upon the earth itself." Sentimentality. The Imperial advisor, a wizened old man named Master Jian, scoffed. "The Empire requires order, efficiency. Sentimentality is a weakness. Efficiency without understanding is chaos," Kaelen countered, a quiet intensity building within him. "The earth does not yield to force, Master Jian. It responds to respect, to connection. The Verdant Pulse allows me to perceive that connection." He subtly shifted his weight, focusing his intent. The air in the chamber shimmered for a fraction of a second, a silent testament to his power. This time, the reaction wasn't fear, but curiosity. The Shadow Weaver, the most unsettling of the council, tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes narrowed. "Interesting," she murmured, her voice a low, melodic whisper. "The echoes of the pulse. They resonate with a specific lineage, one that has been dormant for centuries." Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Silence!" Caspian, his face pale and contorted with fury, was brought before the council by two heavily armed guards. He had been brought to the obsidian chamber as a hostage, a weapon against Kaelen. You dared to interfere in my father's plans," he spat, his rapier raised defensively. "You are a pest, a blight on this city." "You are a threat," Kaelen said, his voice devoid of emotion. He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge Caspian's aggression. He simply stood, a picture of quiet, controlled power. Then, he did something unexpected. He spoke, not in the sharp, clipped tone of a warrior, but in a low, almost lyrical voice. "Look at your hand, Caspian. Feel the ground beneath your feet. It does not belong to you to dominate, but to nurture, to understand. You are a child playing with forces you do not comprehend. And your father, he is a man lost in his ambition, blind to the consequences." As he spoke, Ilara, who had been discreetly observing from the back of the chamber, stepped forward. She hadn't spoken a word, but she was holding a small, intricately carved jade pendant, a gift from Kaelen, given earlier that day. As she approached Caspian, she placed the pendant in his hand. The moment Caspian touched the jade, the ground beneath his feet began to vibrate. The same phenomenon that had occurred in the palace, but this time it was amplified tenfold. The chamber filled with a pulsating green light, intensifying the humming sound, now richer, deeper, almost intoxicating. Caspian screamed, clutching at his head, his body racked with spasms as the earth pressed against him, binding him with vines that felt both cold and strangely comforting. "You possess a remarkable gift, Kaelen," Magistrate Lin said, her voice laced with a new tone. "One of grudging respect, a dangerous gift, but perhaps a gift that can be harnessed." She turned to the Shadow Weaver. "Begin your investigation. Trace the lineage of the Verdant Pulse. I believe we have just stumbled upon something far more ancient and far more powerful than we ever imagined." Chapter 4. Echoes of the Verdant Pulse. The air in the magistrate's chambers hung thick with the lingering scent of ozone and a disconcerting, earthy musk. Caspian lay sprawled on a silk cushion, still shuddering, the jade pendant now a dull, lifeless stone in his hand. He was a shell of his arrogant self, his face pale, eyes wide with a primal terror that suggested a connection to something utterly alien. The green light had faded, leaving only the subtle hum that resonated within the walls, a constant reminder of the unleashed power. Magistrate Lin, a woman known for her glacial composure and iron will, moved with a newfound urgency. She directed the Shadow Weavers, a contingent of elite, masked investigators known for their uncanny ability to track arcane energies, to examine Caspian thoroughly. Their movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as they scanned him with instruments that resembled polished obsidian and emitted a soft, blue glow. "The pulse is erratic," reported Master Jian, the Weaver's lead investigator, his voice hushed. "It's not merely responding to the earth, it seems to be echoing. Like a memory, a fragment of a much larger consciousness." Kaelen, leaning against a carved sandalwood pillar, observed the proceedings with a quiet intensity. The revelation of his true nature had been a terrifying, exhilarating surge of control, a recognition of a lineage he hadn't known existed. He felt the verdant pulse humming within him, a deep, resonant song of the earth, a legacy of a warrior who'd walked the world centuries before. "The cedar," he said, his voice deep and measured, "was not merely a tree. It was a node, a conduit. For generations, the Vane Guild subtly channeled the pulse through it, maintaining balance within the forest. The cleansing wasn't a simple act of destruction. It was an attempt to sever that connection, to reclaim what was rightfully their own." Lin's gaze sharpened. "And you, Heir Vane, are the last of that lineage? The sovereign of the forest?" He inclined his head, a subtle gesture that held both defiance and weariness. "It is a burden as much as a gift, a responsibility to protect what cannot be seen, to remind humanity of its connection to the world around it." The investigation quickly turned to the jade pendant. Master Jian, after hours of painstaking analysis, announced his findings. "The jade is a focal point, a resonance chamber. It amplifies the verdant pulse, focusing its energy. But it was crafted in a style unlike any I've ever encountered. The glyphs, they predate the Eia dynasty. This pendant isn't just an object, it's a key." Suddenly, a young weaver, Lai, rushed forward, his face pale with excitement. "Magistrate, I've identified a faint trace of the pulse's signature. It's leading away from the palace, towards the Blackwood Mountains." The Blackwood Mountains were a region long considered uninhabitable, a treacherous landscape of jagged peaks and perpetual mist, riddled with ancient, forgotten temples and rumored to be the dwelling place of spirits. The notion that the Verdant Pulse, and potentially Kaelen himself, had a connection to such a place sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. "Send a scouting party," Lin commanded, her voice hardening, "and inform the Imperial Guard. We must determine the origin of this pulse and its intended purpose. This is no mere rebellion, it's a threat to the very foundations of the Empire." As the order was given, Ilara entered the chamber, carrying a tray laden with steaming tea and a selection of freshly brewed herbs. Her presence seemed to calm the atmosphere, a quiet counterpoint to the mounting chaos. "Kaelen," she said, her voice gentle. "I felt a disturbance. The earth spoke to me." Kaelen took a sip of the tea, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "And what did it tell you, Ilara?" "It told me that you are not merely a gardener or a warrior. You are a seed, and the earth is waiting for you to bloom." She placed the jade pendant back in his hand, this time, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Your father, Caspian, sought to control the earth. You, Kaelen, must learn to listen to it." As Kaelen held the jade, the hum within the chamber intensified. He focused his intent, drawing upon the verdant pulse, and the pendant pulsed with a vibrant green light. He saw, not with his eyes, but with the ancient consciousness of the forest, images flashing before him, a towering city of stone and jade, swallowed by the earth warriors clad in moss and bark, wielding weapons that drew their power from the very bones of the planet, a cataclysmic event that shattered the empire, leaving behind only fragments of knowledge and the echoes of a lost power. Then, the image solidified, a single figure, older than the mountains themselves, standing beneath a colossal cedar tree, his hand outstretched, his gaze filled with both sorrow and hope. "The verdant pulse will return," he whispered, his voice echoing through the centuries, "but only when the balance is restored. The vision vanished as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving Kaelen breathless, his muscles aching with the exertion. He looked at Ilara, his expression a mixture of awe and apprehension. "The Empire is about to learn a very harsh lesson," he murmured, his voice laced with a newfound determination. "And I, as its reluctant guardian, intend to ensure it understands the true meaning of power." Chapter 5. The Roots of Rebellion. The aftermath of the blooming moon festival settled over the Imperial Palace like a bruised plum. The immediate shock had given way to a cautious, bewildered curiosity. Lord Hektor, stripped of his arrogance and facing a lifetime of shoveling manure, was a shadow of his former self, whimpering to his guards about unnatural forces and cursed earth. Caspian, nursing a severely bruised ego and a chipped rapier, was confined to his chambers, muttering about dirt-stained vermin and the insolence of a gardener. Kaelen, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of quiet, calculated action. The slum district, now officially designated the Verdant Ward, was being meticulously rebuilt according to his specifications. He wasn't interested in grand villas or sprawling carriage paths. Instead, he prioritized restoring the water table, strengthening the existing structures, and incorporating natural elements: moss-covered walls, shaded courtyards, and meandering paths lined with fragrant herbs. The guards, initially tasked with containing him, found themselves diligently planting saplings and tending to a flourishing vegetable patch, subtly mirroring Kaelen's own methods. Ilara, of course, was at the center of it all. The Imperial Gardens, once a sterile collection of meticulously arranged flora for the Emperor's amusement, were becoming a vibrant tapestry of medicinal plants, rare orchids, and ancient trees. Kaelen, guided by her knowledge, introduced techniques drawn from the Verdant Pulse, coaxing growth from barren soil and accelerating the healing properties of the herbs. He gifted her a small, intricately carved wooden container filled with iridescent moss, explaining, "The earth remembers. You are its scribe." The Grand Magistrate, a woman of ice and calculated authority, remained the most unsettling figure. She observed Kaelen's actions with a cold, appraising gaze, her silence more intimidating than any reprimand. While she publicly acknowledged his victory, privately she dispatched a team of Imperial investigators to uncover the source of his power, the Verdant Pulse. They were met with frustratingly vague reports of earth tremors, localized foliage growth, and an unsettlingly calm gardener. The investigators, led by the ruthless Inspector Zhao, were a methodical, almost robotic force. They systematically dismantled Kaelen's tools, analyzed the soil, and interrogated the residents of the Verdant Ward, seeking any trace of a hidden power source. They found nothing. Kaelen's actions were too subtle, too intertwined with the natural rhythm of the city to leave any discernible footprint. However, Zhao wasn't one to concede defeat. He suspected a hidden mentor, a secret sect, or perhaps most alarmingly, a connection to the ancient Vane Wood-Guild. He intensified his surveillance, focusing on Kaelen's movements and his interactions with Ilara. It was during one of these surveillance attempts that Zhao noticed a peculiar phenomenon. Using a newly developed device, a highly sensitive vibration detector, he registered a consistent, low-frequency hum emanating from Kaelen's hands whenever he tended to the plants. The device, designed to detect buried metal, was inexplicably registering the subtle energies of the Verdant Pulse. That night, as Zhao prepared to present his findings to the magistrate, Kaelen summoned him to the heart of the rebuilt shrine. The great cedar, miraculously spared from destruction, stood bathed in the light of the moon, its ancient branches reaching towards the sky like supplicating arms. "Inspector Zhao," Kaelen said, his voice calm but firm, "you have been diligent in your investigation. I appreciate your efforts to understand the nature of the Verdant Pulse." Zhao, bristling with frustration, activated his device, aiming it at the cedar. The device erupted in a cacophony of clicks and whirs, confirming what he had already suspected. The constant, low-frequency hum. This is impossible, Zhao exclaimed, his face flushed with anger. This device is calibrated for metal. It's registering life energy. You're channeling some kind of ancient martial art. Kaelen simply smiled, a hint of melancholy in his eyes. The earth is more than just rock and soil, Inspector. It is a consciousness, a memory. The Vane Wood-Guild was not simply about timber. It was about understanding and respecting the heart of the world. My family sought to exploit it. I seek to heal it. He raised his hand, palm open, and focused his intent. The cedar tree shimmered, and a cascade of green energy flowed from it, engulfing Zhao in a wave of sensation. Zhao collapsed, screaming in agony as images flooded his mind: the cataclysm, the lost warriors, the sorrowful figure beneath the ancient tree. When the energy subsided, Zhao was a broken man. His faith in the Empire shattered. Kaelen, however, wasn't finished. He held out the jade pendant, the one Ilara had given him, and channeled the Verdant Pulse through it, sending another, more concentrated pulse directly into Zhao's mind. The Empire is built on lies and exploitation, he whispered, his voice echoing with the power of the forest. And its foundations will crumble. As Zhao, utterly disoriented and consumed by the overwhelming sensation, stumbled away, Kaelen turned to Ilara, his gaze filled with a quiet intensity. The balance is shifting, Ilara. And with it, the echoes of the past are growing louder. Chapter 6: Echoes in Stone. The aftermath of the Cedar's revelation hung heavy in the Imperial Palace. Inspector Zhao, a man hardened by decades of upholding the Emperor's iron will, was now a shivering husk, confined to a small, windowless chamber within the Imperial archives. The city's whispers turned to rumors, whispers of a hidden warrior, a legacy of forgotten power, and a direct challenge to the very foundations of the Empire. Kaelen, meanwhile, continued his seemingly mundane existence as a gardener. Head spent the morning meticulously layering riverstones around a cluster of moon orchids, humming a low, resonant tune that seemed to vibrate through the very soil. He deliberately avoided the palace guards, the nervous glances of the clerks, and the increasingly pointed questions of Lord Hektor, who had, predictably, summoned a delegation to investigate the incident at the shrine. Ilara, her face etched with a mixture of awe and apprehension, arrived shortly after midday. She carried a small woven basket overflowing with fragrant herbs: rosemary, thyme, and the potent dark root of the nightshade blossom. "I've been researching," she said, carefully arranging the herbs on a stone table. "The great cedar, it's far older than the records suggest. The Vane Wood-Guild didn't just harvest timber, they guarded a nexus point, a place where the earth's energy is particularly concentrated. The cataclysm, the legends spoke of a ritual designed to control, not simply understand, the pulse." Kaelen nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the intricate patterns of moss on the stone. "And your suspicions were correct. My family wasn't protecting the forest, they were attempting to weaponize its power." Suddenly, a tremor ran through the courtyard. Not an earthquake, but something more subtle, more resonant. The air thickened with a palpable energy. The ornate fountain in the center of the courtyard began to bubble, spewing not water, but a shimmering, emerald mist. "The echoes are amplifying," Ilara murmured, her hand instinctively reaching for a small, polished jade amulet she wore around her neck. "The memories are returning." From the mist, images coalesced. Not merely scenes from the past, but individuals, warriors clad in moss-green armor, their faces grim and determined. They moved with a terrifying grace, wielding not swords or spears, but extensions of the earth itself, vines that snaked around their opponents, roots that erupted from the ground to trip them, stones that launched with impossible force. Then, a figure emerged from the heart of the swirling energy, a woman, radiating an ancient, almost unbearable sorrow. She stood beneath the great cedar, facing a monstrous metallic construct, a machine of brutal efficiency designed to drain the pulse's energy. "That's Lyra," Kaelen said, his voice hushed. "The last of the Verdant Guardians. She sacrificed herself to destroy the machine, but her spirit, her knowledge, it remained tethered to the cedar." As the vision ended, the mist dissipated, and the fountain returned to its normal flow. But something had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen power. And, crucially, the jade pendant Alara had gifted him pulsed with a warm, vibrant light. "The pendant," Kaelen said, turning to her. "It's acting as a conduit. Lyra's essence is seeking connection." He reached for the pendant, and as his fingers brushed against the smooth jade, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. A section of the courtyard floor, worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic, cracked open, revealing a dark, spiraling staircase leading down into the earth. "This wasn't here before," Alara gasped, her eyes wide with astonishment. "A hidden passage!" It must have been built by the Vane Wood-Guild. Before either of them could react, the staircase began to glow with a pulsating green light. Figures materialized from the shadows, spectral warriors, clad in moss-green armor, their weapons raised, ready for battle. They moved with the same devastating grace, the same terrifying efficiency, as the figures from the vision. "They're not attacking," Kaelen observed, his expression calm despite the unfolding chaos. "They're testing, assessing, seeking guidance." He raised his hand again, palm open, and focused his intent. The energy of the cedar flowed through him, channeled through the pendant and the newly revealed passage. The spectral warriors froze, their movements halting, their eyes filled with a sudden, profound understanding. "The balance," Kaelen's voice resonated with the power of the forest, "is restored." As suddenly as it had begun, the apparition vanished. The stairs returned to normal, and the pulsing light subsided. Kaelen stood, breathing heavily, the jade pendant cool against his skin. "The Emperor's forces will be arriving soon," Alara said, her voice filled with a newfound urgency. "We need to understand this passage, this connection to Lyra. This isn't just about protecting the cedar, it's about unlocking a power that could reshape the entire empire." Kaelen nodded, a flicker of steel in his eyes. "The reckoning has begun, Ilara, and I intend to ensure it is a righteous one." Chapter 7. Echoes of Lyra. The air in the newly revealed passage thrummed with a residual energy, a damp, cool sensation that clung to the stone walls. It smelled of rain, ancient wood, and something subtly metallic, the ghost of a battle fought millennia ago. "Dada," Kaelen, now fully conscious of the shifting weight of his power, ran a hand over the moss-covered walls, tracing the intricate carvings that had remained hidden until now. They depicted scenes of beings resembling humanoid trees, engaged in what appeared to be complex martial arts, their movements fluid and unnervingly precise. "These aren't simply decorative," he murmured, his voice low. "They're records, a chronicle of the Verdant Pulse." He turned to Alara, who was meticulously sketching the carvings in her worn notebook, a focused frown etched on her face. The spectral warriors, their arrival wasn't random. They weren't hunting an enemy, they were answering a call. Suddenly, a sharp, discordant chime echoed from the depths of the passage. It wasn't a sound produced by any known instrument. It resonated within their bones, a vibrating pulse that seemed to unravel anxieties and sharpen awareness. Kaelen's hand instinctively moved to the jade pendant around his neck, its cool surface a grounding point. "The passage is reacting," he stated, his eyes narrowing. "The energy signature is intensifying. We're drawing attention." Before he could issue a command, the walls began to shimmer, not with the ethereal glow of the previous apparition, but with a deeper, almost oppressive darkness. From the shadows emerged not spectral warriors, but illusions. Dozens of them, each a perfect replica of Kaelen, clad in the moss-green armor, wielding identical weapons. They moved with unsettling synchronization, circling him with lethal intent. "Mirror strikes," Elara whispered, recognizing the tactic. "They're testing our defenses, exploiting our uncertainty." Kaelen didn't flinch. He had anticipated this. He focused, deepening his connection to the earth beneath his feet. The familiar sensation of the root-bound state surged through him, but this time it wasn't a defensive reaction. He consciously amplified the energy, directing it outwards, not as an attack, but as a force of disruption. The illusions stuttered, their movements becoming jerky and fragmented, as if battling a wave of chaotic energy. "The essence of the cedar," Kaelen explained, his voice strained. "It's a conduit. It amplifies intent. These illusions are fueled by the attempts to control it, to claim its power." He struck out with a force that wouldn't have been noticeable to a casual observer. Each movement, a blurring whirlwind of controlled energy. The illusions shattered against his strikes, collapsing into wisps of dark smoke. As the last illusion dissolved, a single shimmering fragment remained. A projection of a woman, ancient and regal, clad in jade robes and adorned with intricate wooden ornaments. Her eyes held an unnerving depth, and she spoke in a voice that resonated with the weight of centuries. "Kaelen Vane," she said, her voice echoing within the passage. "You have awakened the echoes of Lyra. The pulse is not merely a martial art, it is a lineage, a responsibility. You are the last guardian of a power, meant to maintain balance, a balance threatened by those who seek to dominate, to reshape the world in their own image." She gestured towards a hidden alcove, revealing a chamber filled with scrolls, intricate mechanical devices crafted from wood and metal, and a large central platform carved from a single piece of jade. This was the heart of the Lyra order. They did not simply wield the pulse, they understood it. They could manipulate the flow of life, the growth of the forest, the very rhythm of the earth. Suddenly, a low, grinding sound filled the passage. The floor beneath them shifted, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow corridor leading downwards. A faint green light pulsed from within. "They're expecting us," Kaelen said, his voice grim. "Someone else knows about this passage. And judging by the intensity of the energy, they're waiting to see how we react." He turned to Elara, his expression serious. "We're moving into an arena of layered deception. We must be wary, Elara. This isn't just about the cedar anymore. It's about unveiling the full extent of the Vane Guild's legacy." Elara, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, adjusted her notebook. "Then, let us begin to unravel the echoes of Lyra," she said, a determined glint in her eye. "Let us learn to fight, not just with the pulse, but with its wisdom." As they stepped into the green-lit corridor, they knew this was only the beginning of a reckoning far more complex and dangerous than they could have ever imagined. Chapter 8. Echoes of Jade. The green light intensified as we descended, the air growing thick with the scent of damp moss, and something metallic, the residual tang of potent energy. The corridor narrowed, the walls carved with spiraling patterns that seemed to shift subtly in the flickering light. Elara, meticulously sketching the intricate carvings with charcoal, muttered observations about the Lyra Order's obsession with fractal geometry. "Their understanding of the pulse isn't merely kinetic," she stated. "It's deeply interwoven with the structure of the universe itself. It's beautifully chaotic." The grinding sound returned, louder this time, accompanied by a distinct click. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, a subterranean observatory bathed in the pulsating green glow, emanating from a massive, multifaceted jade sphere, suspended in the center. It wasn't simply a sphere, it was a complex mechanism, a swirling vortex of miniature gears, pipes, and pulsing crystals, all perfectly synchronized. Around the base of the sphere were rows of consoles crafted from dark, polished wood, each covered in glyphs that hummed with barely perceptible energy. Before the sphere, a figure stood motionless. It was a man, tall and lean, dressed in simple, earth-toned robes, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat woven from jade moss. He was radiating a quiet power, a subtle but undeniable resonance of the pulse. "A guardian," Kaelen murmured, his hand instinctively resting on the handle of a simple pruning shear he'd been carrying, and a remarkably well-preserved one at that. The guardian turned, revealing a face etched with centuries-deep wrinkles radiating from piercing gray eyes. He didn't speak, but a voice, ancient and resonant, filled the chamber, seeming to originate not from his mouth, but from the jade sphere itself. "You have sought the echoes of Lyra. You have discovered a place of slumber, but slumber is a deceptive state. The pulse does not simply rest, it waits, and it judges." Suddenly, 3 more figures materialized from the shadows, each a skilled warrior in a variation of the Lyra Order's distinctive jade-woven armor. They moved with a fluid grace, their movements imbued with the pulse, and immediately began to circle Kaelen and Alara, their weapons exquisitely crafted polearms tipped with obsidian ready. "Don't attack," Kaelen commanded, his voice calm despite the evident danger. "We don't wish to engage. We simply want to understand." The lead warrior, a woman with a stern expression, raised her polearm. "Understand nothing. The Lyra Order vanished centuries ago, protecting this knowledge from those who would exploit it. You trespass. We will prevent you from uncovering secrets that should remain buried." This was the arena of layered deception Kaelen had forewarned us about. They weren't just defending the sphere, they were guarding something far more valuable: the ability to manipulate the pulse beyond simple sensing and redirection. Without a word, Kaelen shifted, the familiar ripple of the root-bound state washing over him. The air around him solidified, thickening with the raw power of the earth. The ground beneath the warriors' feet trembled, and the obsidian tips of their polearms began to vibrate violently. "The pulse responds to intention," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "It's not brute force, but precision. Control." He didn't attack. Instead, he focused his energy, not on damaging the warriors, but on disrupting their movements, causing them to stumble and lose their balance. The jade sphere pulsed brighter, seemingly feeding his power, while the mechanical devices around the console began to whir and click with increased speed. Alara, observing the unfolding scene, realized something crucial. The consoles. They're not just displaying information. They're amplifying the pulse. The Lyra Order didn't just understand the pulse, they learned to shape it. She began scribbling furiously in her notebook, attempting to decipher the glyphs on the console nearest her. As she worked, the Guardian spoke again, his voice tinged with a hint of urgency. "You are disrupting the calibration. The sphere's function is not merely to preserve knowledge, but to act as a conduit, a focal point for the pulse's latent energies. Your presence is destabilizing it." Suddenly, the jade sphere began to rotate with increasing speed, emitting a high-pitched whine. A beam of pure green energy shot from the center of the sphere, striking the floor with a deafening impact. The ground buckled, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a deeper chamber, a repository of crystalline data, humming with the raw energy of 1,000 years. Kaelen, sensing the surge of energy, moved to intercept the beam, his body a whirlwind of controlled power. But as he did, a figure stepped from the shadows behind him, Caspian, the arrogant, spoiled son of Lord Hektor, his face a mask of cold fury, wielding a newly forged blade that radiated with dark energy, a counterpoint to the pure green of the pulse. "Impressive," Caspian sneered, "but a gardener's trick won't stand against a true warrior." He lunged. Chapter 9: Echoes of the Stone. The air in the deeper chamber throbbed with the residual energy of the sphere's outburst, a tangible pressure against Kaelen's skin. Green light danced in his eyes, a reflection of the pulse surging through him, and the scent of ozone mingled with the ancient musk of the crystalline data. He pivoted, meeting Caspian's attack with a movement born of instinct and honed over centuries. It wasn't a flashy display of martial arts, not yet. It was the earth itself responding to his will. Caspian's blade, a wickedly curved thing called the Shadow Fang, pulsed with a sickly violet light, a corruption of the pulse. It was unnervingly precise, designed to shatter rather than simply cut, and the air around it felt poisoned. Kaelen didn't parry with steel, he simply shifted his weight, the ground beneath Caspian's feet momentarily yielding, throwing him off balance. The Shadow Fang slashed, but instead of connecting with Kaelen's flesh, it slammed into a wall of shimmering, hardened earth, a subtle, instinctive defense erected by the root-bound state. The impact resonated through the chamber, and the Guardian, a bronze automaton shaped like a coiled dragon, roared in protest, its gears grinding as it tried to compensate for the disruption. Containment failing. Pulse interference escalating, it bellowed, attempting to redirect the raw energy. But Kaelen's control was growing stronger, more focused. "You're playing with forces you don't understand, Caspian," Kaelen said, his voice low and controlled, barely audible over the escalating whine of the sphere. "This isn't a game of petty arrogance." Caspian ignored him, pressing his attack. He moved with a desperate, almost frantic grace, fueled by the arrogance of his lineage and a raw, untrained aggression. He was a predator, circling, seeking a weakness, and Kaelen, despite his centuries of experience, felt a primal vulnerability. This boy, driven by entitlement, was a dangerous wild card. Kaelen realized he couldn't simply react. He needed to shape the pulse, not just unleash it. He focused, recalling the lessons Alara had unwittingly taught him, the delicate connection between the earth and life, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the silent language of the roots. He drew upon the memory of the great cedar, the pulse of the slums water table, and amplified it, not with brute force but with nuanced precision. The ground beneath Caspian shifted again, this time with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. Roots, thick as pythons, erupted from the floor, seeking purchase around his legs. It wasn't a violent attack. It was a gentle, inexorable embrace, designed to immobilize, not to harm. Caspian shrieked, struggling against the grasping roots, his footing lost. He stumbled, throwing himself backwards, narrowly avoiding a full-blown entanglement. This is impossible," he sputtered, the violet energy of the Shadow Fang flickering erratically. The Guardian seized the opportunity, unleashing a volley of compressed air blasts, attempting to disrupt Kaelen's concentration. But Kaelen was already moving, channeling the pulse through his hands, creating a momentary wall of shimmering earth, deflecting the attacks. As the Guardian's efforts faltered, a figure emerged from behind the crystalline data repository Alara. She wasn't wielding a weapon, but she held a small, intricately carved wooden flute, crafted from a piece of the great cedar. As she began to play, a haunting melody filled the chamber, a counterpoint to the frantic whine of the sphere and the escalating chaos of the pulse. The effect was immediate. The violet light of the Shadow Fang dimmed, sputtering like a dying flame. The roots that had ensnared Caspian loosened their grip, retracting back into the floor. The Guardian's movement slowed, its gears grinding with confusion. The cedars song Caspian gasped, his face contorted with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "It disrupts the pulse. It's a vulnerability." Kaelen realized Alara's intuition had been precisely correct. The Lyra Order hadn't just sought to understand the pulse, they had understood its inherent harmony, its connection to the natural world. And now, she was using that knowledge to neutralize his power. "You've been studying the pulse, Alara," Kaelen said, his voice laced with a sudden understanding. "You've learned to listen to the earth." Alara lowered her flute, her eyes wide with a dawning awareness. "The Constelles are not just recording the pulse, they are amplifying it, creating echoes of the ancient rhythms," she said, her fingers already dancing over the glyph-covered console, scribbling furiously in her notebook. "The spherit's a memory bank, a nexus of power. And Caspian, he's attempting to corrupt it, to weaponize it." Suddenly, the jade sphere pulsed with blinding light, and a holographic projection flickered to life, depicting a scene from centuries past a council of robed figures, wielding instruments of bone and jade. Channeling the pulse with terrifying precision, the founding members of the Lyra Order engaged in a ritual that seemed both magnificent and profoundly dangerous. Kaelen understood then. He wasn't simply fighting a warrior, he was fighting a legacy, a corrupted stream of power that threatened to consume him. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that Caspian wasn't merely seeking to defeat him. He was seeking to become something more. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Weaver. The jade sphere continued to pulse, casting an unsettling green glow over Ilara's workspace, illuminating the frantic scribbles in her notebook. Caspian's ambition, once a childish taunt, now manifested as a tangible threat, a deliberate manipulation of the pulse itself. Kaelen felt the earth beneath him thrum with a discordant energy, a fractured reflection of the ancient harmony had painstakingly cultivated. "The consoles," Ilara gasped, her breath coming in ragged bursts. "They're feeding him. They're essentially broadcasting Hishi's dissonance back at the pulse, amplifying it. It's like he's unraveling the very threads of the earth's song." Kaelen, usually calm in the face of overwhelming force, felt a cold dread grip him. The root-bound state, his primary defense, felt weaker, muddied by the corrupted echoes. He needed to sever the connection, to silence the amplifiers. "Show me the glyphs," he commanded, his voice low and deliberate. Ilara, already a whirlwind of nervous energy, quickly pointed to the intricate carvings on the console. They depicted swirling patterns reminiscent of root systems, interwoven with stylized representations of the moon and the stars. The Lyra Order weren't just studying the pulse, they were mapping its flow, creating pathways weavers. They called themselves to control its resonance. As Ilara manipulated the console, the holographic projection shifted, resolving into a clearer image. The ancient council members weren't merely channeling the pulse, they were actively shaping it, weaving intricate patterns of energy with their instruments. Kaelen recognized the instruments, bone flutes and jade rods, identical to the tools had instinctively used when accessing the root-bound state. They understood the pulse wasn't just a force of raw power, Ilara observed. It was a language. And Caspian, he's trying to rewrite it. Suddenly, the room filled with a high-pitched whine, a resonant vibration that threatened to shatter his teeth. The jade sphere intensified its glow, and a new image materialized in the holographic projection Caspian docked at. Not the arrogant, sneering boy Kaelen had faced in the slums, but an older, more refined version, clad in dark silk robes, his eyes burning with an unnatural intensity as he manipulated a glowing jade rod, attempting to force a jagged, chaotic pattern onto the sphere. Hes creating a dissonance signature, Kaelen realized, the implications hitting him with the force of a physical blow. A deliberate disruption. If he can fully corrupt the pulse, he can wield it like a weapon, shattering the Earth's defenses, unleashing devastating energy. Without warning, a squadron of Imperial guards, clad in polished steel and bearing the emblem of the dragon, burst into the room. Grand Magistrate Lynn, Kaelen's mother, stood at their head, her face a mask of barely concealed panic. "Kaelen, the reports are confirmed. Caspian has activated the pulse amplifiers, hidden within the Imperial Archive, as drawing upon the energy of the entire city's ley lines." Kaelen knew he couldn't engage in a direct confrontation. The city's defenses were now weaponized, and the corrupted pulse would bolster Caspian's attacks. He needed a different approach, a subtle disruption to neutralize the amplifiers. "Ilara, the consoles," he instructed, his movements fluid and precise. "I need you to introduce a counter-resonance, a harmonic thread to weave through his dissonance. Use the glyphs but listen to the pulse." Ilara, guided by Kaelen's unspoken commands, began to manipulate the console with a frantic intensity, her fingers dancing across the glyphs. A complex melody, composed not of sound but of vibrational energy, began to emanate from the sphere, mingling with the chaotic whine of Caspian's efforts. As the two energies clashed, the holographic projection flickered wildly, showcasing countless images, visions of ancient battles, moments of profound connection between humanity and nature, and glimpses of the Lyra Order's forbidden rituals. Kaelen realized the true scope of the corruption wasn't just about weaponizing the pulse, it was about erasing the connection, dismantling the legacy of harmony. Suddenly, a searing pain shot through his hand, and he stumbled, clutching at his chest. The root-bound state faltered, his control slipping. He recognized the cause. Immediately, Caspian was deliberately targeting his access point, his deepest vulnerability. "Hes pushing!" Elara screamed, frantically adjusting the console. "His dissonance is overwhelming. The sphere is fracturing." Kaelen, drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed, reached out with his mind, not to combat the dissonance, but to understand it. He focused on the fractured patterns, the chaotic echoes, and began to feel the pulse, not as a weapon to wield, but as a living thing, a wild, untamed current of energy seeking balance. And as he did, a single clear note emerged from the chaos, a note of breathtaking beauty and profound tranquility. It was the song of the forest, a song of rooted strength and unwavering resilience. He began to sing, a wordless chant, channeling the pulse through his very being, weaving a new harmonic thread into the fractured fabric of the earth. Chapter 11. The Seed of Resonance. The air, in the subterranean chamber of the rebuilt Imperial Gardens, hung thick with ozone and a strange, almost floral scent. The holographic sphere, once a chaotic kaleidoscope of corrupted energy, now pulsed with a soft emerald light, stabilized by Elara's relentless adjustments. Kaelen, leaning heavily on her, felt the throbbing in his hands subside, replaced by a warm, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate within his bones. Caspian's desperate attempt to sever his connection with the pulse hadn't destroyed it, but it had nearly shattered the delicate balance, pushing them dangerously close to collapse. "It's remarkable," Elara breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and scientific curiosity. "The harmonic frequency you generated, it's not just stabilizing the pulse, Kaelen. It's refining it, smoothing out the dissonance." Kaelen nodded, taking a slow, deliberate breath. The pain was gone, but a deep awareness had taken its place, a feeling of being inextricably linked to the earth beneath their feet, to the very flow of life that surged through the veins of the world. "It's not about suppressing the chaos," he said, his voice hoarse from exertion. "It's about understanding it. The pulse isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be guided." Around them, the Imperial Gardens, newly transformed into a haven of lush, vibrant flora, seemed to respond to this shift in energy. Exotic blossoms unfurled their petals in a silent symphony, vines thickened with an almost frantic growth, and the air thrummed with a palpable vitality. Elara, her face flushed with excitement, meticulously examined a sample of soil brought from the devastated shrine. "The initial readings were horrifying," she muttered. "The residual corruption was like a stagnant pool, poisoning the very roots. But your song, it's acting as a catalyst. It's forcing the earth to heal, to cleanse itself." Suddenly, the console flickered violently, displaying a cascade of new data. A holographic projection, sharper and clearer than anything they'd seen before, materialized a panoramic view of the Imperial Palace grounds, overlaid with a complex network of energy signatures. The pulse isn't just affecting the gardens. A voice, cool and analytical, cut through the air. Master Gian, a wizened, almost spectral guardian of the Lyra Order, materialized from the shadows, his presence radiating an ancient, almost unbearable stillness. "It's reacting to the palace itself. The excessive construction, The relentless exploitation of resources, it's creating a localized distortion, a dead zone within the pulse. We have to address the source, Kaelen stated, his eyes narrowing. Hektor's villa, Dortuna. It's a focal point of that corruption. A dangerous proposition, Giant warned, his voice laced with caution. The pulse doesn't respond well to aggressive force. It needs nurturing, not confrontation. Then we nurture it, Kaelen replied, a subtle shift in his demeanor. He gently placed his hand on the console, initiating a process he hadn't fully understood before. The holographic projection shifted again, displaying a network of interconnected nodes, shimmering threads of emerald light extending outwards from the Imperial Gardens, weaving themselves through the city's foundations, reaching out to the very edges of the Silk Forest. "You're creating a resonance field," Alara exclaimed, her fingers flying across the console. "You're amplifying the pulse, extending its reach, strengthening the connection between the city and the natural world." As the resonance field expanded, a ripple of energy surged through the gardens. The water in the reflecting pool seemed to glow with an internal luminescence, and the leaves of the ancient trees rustled with a newfound vigor. Then, a tremor shook the ground, not violent or destructive, but a gentle, insistent vibration, a heartbeat of the earth. "It's responding to us," Kaelen whispered, a smile playing on his lips. "It's listening." Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the chamber, escalating in intensity. The holographic sphere pulsed erratically, displaying increasingly fragmented images not of battles or ancient rituals, but of something far more disturbing. Visions of twisted, corrupted flora, of rivers choked with black sludge, of desolate landscapes, ravaged by the pulse's chaotic energy. "It's escalating," Alara shouted, desperately adjusting the console. "The dissonance is building. He's trying to overwhelm us." Kaelen closed his eyes, drawing upon the song he had discovered within himself, channeling the pulse through his body with unwavering focus. He visualized a single seed, a tiny kernel of potential, and projected it outward, not as a weapon, but as an offering, a seed of resonance, a tiny beacon of tranquility in the heart of the storm. As he did, a single, vibrant crimson flower bloomed in the center of the holographic sphere, its petals unfurling with a breathtaking grace. It was a flower he hadn't seen before, a flower of impossible beauty, radiating warmth and serenity. "It's anchoring the pulse," John murmured, a rare flicker of approval in his eyes. Hez weaving a new narrative, a counter-melody to the dissonance. Hez not just wielding the pulse, Hez cultivating it. Chapter 12. The Seed of Resonance. The air in the observation chamber of the Imperial Observatory hung thick with a strange, almost floral scent, a lingering echo of the crimson bloom. Jian, ever the meticulous recorder, was frantically sketching the holographic sphere, now stabilized, displaying a looping image of the flower species utterly unknown to any recorded botanical text. The frantic energy that had gripped the room since Kaelen's initial revelation had subsided, replaced by a cautious, fascinated awe. "The energy signature is stabilizing," reported Master Li, his wrinkled face etched with a mixture of apprehension and profound respect. "It's not simply suppressing the dissonance, young Kaelen. It's absorbing it, transforming it." Kaelen, standing silently amidst the complex machinery, felt a subtle hum beneath his skin, a constant awareness of the earth's rhythm flowing through him. Had spent the intervening hours observing the holographic sphere, meticulously studying the ebb and flow of the pulse, now less a destructive force and more a living, breathing current. He realized with a chilling clarity that the distorted visions weren't merely a symptom of the pulse's instability. They were echoes of a past where the forest had been irrevocably scarred, a potential future if unchecked. "The recordings from the Great Cedar, they confirm it," Kaelen said, his voice low, directing his gaze towards the holographic projection. The pulse wasn't just a weapon. It was a warning, a desperate attempt to preserve balance when the earth itself was sick. Suddenly, Caspian's voice, laced with venomous disbelief, shattered the quiet. A warning? You call this a warning? You're a madman, a sorcerer. You destroyed 3 guards with a bloody trowel. A contingent of Imperial guards, led by a stern-faced Captain Zhao, had been dispatched to secure the observatory. Caspian, predictably, accompanied them, his rapier gleaming with barely restrained fury. He was escorted in by Magistrate Zhao, Kaelen's mother, her face a mask of controlled fury. The sight of her kneeling before the heir, a man formerly dismissed as a lowly gardener, was a blow to her pride and a stark reminder of her son's humiliating defeat. "Silence, Caspian," Magistrate Zhao commanded, her voice carrying the weight of imperial authority. "The boy has demonstrated a mastery of power beyond comprehension. We must heed his wisdom." Kaelen remained impassive, observing the scene with a detached curiosity. The power he wielded wasn't about displays of force, it was about understanding, about reconnecting with the ancient rhythms of the earth. He focused on the holographic flower, gently extending his awareness, seeking to comprehend its purpose, its origins. "There's a resonance here," he murmured, his hand hovering over the sphere. "A connection. It's not just absorbing the dissonance, it's learning from it. It's processing the corruption, analyzing its cause." Suddenly the flower shimmered, and a new image overlaid the existing projection. This time, it wasn't a vision of decay, but of a single, vibrant green shoot emerging from cracked earth, a tiny seedling pushing upwards towards the light. "As attempting to repair the damage," Alara exclaimed, her voice filled with wonder. "Hez using the pulse not to punish, but to heal." Just as she finished speaking, a deep tremor shook the observatory. The holographic sphere flared with an intense, almost painful light, and a voice, ancient and resonant, echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a spoken voice, but a symphony of rustling leaves, flowing water, and the slow, deliberate heartbeat of the earth. "The seed is sown," the voice intoned, "but the soil must be cleansed." Kaelen's eyes widened. He understood. The crimson flower wasn't merely a counter-melody, it was a catalyst. He reached out, channeling the pulse through his hand, directing it towards a small, carefully constructed ceramic basin placed at the base of the holographic sphere. The basin began to glow with a soft, ethereal light, and a single nascent root began to sprout from the soil within. "It's anchoring the repair," Jain whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Has creating a conduit, a pathway for the pulse to actively heal the earth." As the root took hold, the distorted visions within the holographic sphere began to fade, replaced by a clearer, more hopeful image, a vast ancient forest teeming with life, bathed in the golden light of 1,000 suns. Kaelen had not just revealed his power, he had begun to cultivate a solution, a way to not just contain the destructive potential of the pulse, but to actively mend the wounds of the earth, one seed at a time. The reckoning hadn't been about vengeance. It was about beginning a new harmony, a silent promise whispered between a gardener and the soul of the forest. Chapter 13. Echoes in the stone. The rain hadn't stopped. It hammered against the newly constructed roof of Alara's apothecary, a rhythmic drumming that mirrored the frantic pace of construction within. The air, thick with the scent of dried herbs and damp earth, felt charged, vibrating with the residual energy of the previous night's revelation. Kaelen, normally a calm, almost unnervingly serene presence, moved with a focused intensity, directing the stonemasons with precise hand gestures, gestures that subtly manipulated the very density of the mortar as it set. He was no longer simply a gardener, he was an architect of reality, shaping the physical world with the Verdant Pulse. John, his face pale with exhaustion, but alight with excitement, monitored the holographic sphere, now housed within a reinforced obsidian casing built into the heart of the apothecary. The initial tremors had subsided, but the sphere pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, a blue-green light filtering through the intricate carvings, depicting ancient forest spirits. "The energy signature is stabilizing," John announced, his voice hushed. "The distortions are diminishing." "It's remarkable, Kaelen. The sphere isn't just showing a memory of the damage. It's responding to your influence. It's learning to heal." Kaelen nodded, his weathered face etched with concentration. He knelt beside the basin, now overflowing with a miniature forest of luminous moss and tiny violet flowers, a carefully cultivated micro-ecosystem fed by the pulse. The root, once a delicate tendril, had thickened, establishing itself as a substantial, pulsating column. It glowed with a gentle, restorative light and a faint, sweet fragrance, like rain on pine needles, drifted from its tip. Suddenly, a gruff voice cut through the rhythmic hammering. "Well, well, well. Look what we have here." A little garden turned into a temple. Lord Hektor, flanked by 2 hulking guards, stood in the doorway, flanked by the unsettlingly calm Caspian. Hektor's face was a mask of controlled fury, while Caspian's was a sneer of triumphant malice. They had clearly been tracking Kaelen's progress. "Lord Hektor," Kaelen said, his voice level, devoid of any emotion. "I thought you were occupied with your education." "Don't play coy with me, Vane," Hektor spat. "You interfered. You disrupted my plans. And now, you've built this shrine to the earth, diverting resources that could be used for progress." Caspian stepped forward, his rapier, now gleaming with a faint blue sheen, held loosely in his hand. "Let's be blunt, Gardener. You wield a dangerous power. A power that threatens the natural order, the rightful order." Kaelen remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the pulsing root. He could feel the shift in the earth's energy, a subtle ripple of resistance, a tightening of the pulse around him. He didn't acknowledge Hektor's words. Instead, he reached out, not with aggression, but with a deliberate, calming gesture. He directed a small stream of water, collected from the newly purified spring fed by the apothecary's cellar, onto the base of the root. "You mistake disruption for chaos," Kaelen said, his voice gaining an unexpected resonance. "This isn't about progress, it's about balance. You seek to consume, to dominate. The earth provides, but it also demands respect." As the water touched the root, the sphere within the obsidian casing flared violently, unleashing a wave of raw energy. The holographic forest intensified, reaching a breathtaking level of detail. Individual leaves rustled in a simulated breeze. A tiny stream gurgled through a miniature valley. But this time, something was different. The image wasn't just beautiful, it felt aware. Then, the image shifted. It wasn't a depiction of a forest. It was a projection of him. A younger Kaelen, clad in the crimson silks of the Vane Guild, standing in a vast, ancient forest, wielding a similar, albeit far more ornate, staff. The younger Kaelen smiled, a genuine, heartbreakingly sad smile, and a single word echoed from the sphere, "Remember." Hektor and Caspian recoiled, their faces contorted in confusion and fear. Caspian's grip on his rapier tightened, but his movements were sluggish, as if fighting against an invisible force. Kaelen reached out, and with a concentrated surge of the pulse, he severed the connection between the sphere and the holographic projection. The sphere dimmed, returning to its steady, reassuring blue-green light. "The earth remembers," Kaelen said, his voice echoing with the ancient wisdom of the forest, "and sometimes it chooses to show you the truth." He turned to face Hektor and Caspian, his eyes radiating an unyielding power. "You sought to destroy, but you stumbled upon something far older, far more profound. Your arrogance is a sickness, Lord Hektor. A sickness that will now be purged." Without a word, he raised his hand. The ground beneath Hektor and Caspian's feet began to tremble, not with an explosion, but with a slow, deliberate subsidence, a gradual drawing in of the earth. The stone floor cracked and shifted, and before either man could react, they were swallowed whole, disappearing into the newly formed fissure. John let out a gasp of relief. "The pulsite's cleansing," he whispered, gazing in awe at the root. "It's not just healing the earth, it's purging corruption." Chapter 14. The stone sleeps the air in the Imperial Gardens, hung thick with the scent of exotic blossoms, and the stunned silence of a court observing a miracle. Lord Hektor and Caspian, the former architects of the slums' destruction, lay sprawled at the bottom of the fissure, not crushed, but suspended in a pocket of perfectly smooth gray stone. The edges of the fissure pulsed with a faint, verdant light, a residual echo of Kaelen's power. Grand Magistrate Lynn, Kaelen's mother, knelt before him, her face etched with a complex mixture of horror and reluctant admiration. She had spent her life building the Vane Guild into a formidable power, a force built on ruthless efficiency and strategic acquisition. The idea of her heir, masquerading as a simple gardener, wielding such devastating force felt like a betrayal. Yet the evidence before her was undeniable. "Son," she began, her voice a strained tremor, "explain this. This madness." Kaelen stood calmly, the dust of the shrine clinging to his worn tunic. He held a simple wooden trowel in one hand, a tool head used to tend the tiny flower beds he'd painstakingly cultivated. "The earth remembers, mother," he repeated, the words imbued with the same resonant power had used before, "and it does not tolerate those who seek to exploit its gifts for selfish gain." He addressed the assembled court, a collection of startled officials, nervous scholars, and the perpetually suspicious military. For years, the Vane Guild has profited from the Empire's timber resources, ignoring the ancient agreements that protected these lands. Lord Hektor and his son sought to erase the very foundations of this district, driven by greed and a blatant disregard for balance. The earth responded. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Caspian's youngest son, a zealous young officer named Zhao, stepped forward, brandishing his sword. "This is sorcery. This is treason." Kaelen didn't flinch. "It is not sorcery, young Zhao, but the manifestation of a power older than any empire. The Verdant Pulse. It is a harmony, a connection between all living things, and those who disrupt it suffer consequences." He gestured towards the fissure, and a team of Imperial engineers, summoned with impressive speed, began to cautiously assess the stability of the newly formed opening. They were baffled, of course. The stone beneath was as solid as any in the palace, yet it had simply dissolved, swallowed by an unseen force. Elara, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, approached Kaelen. "It's magnificent," she whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of the fissure. "The earth isn't just reacting, it's correcting." Kaelen smiled, a genuine, unforced expression that softened his weathered features. "Indeed. The earth sleeps, but it never truly rests." He turned to his mother. "I intend to use this power, not for conquest, but for preservation. I will rebuild this district, not with stone and ambition, but with respect and understanding. And I will ensure that no one ever desecrates the land again." His decision was swift and decisive. With a single command, relayed through a squad of loyal Vane Guild guards, Hektor and Caspian were hauled from the fissure and brought before the magistrate. The punishment was immediate and brutal. Stripped of their titles, their lands, and their standing, they were sentenced to a decade of manual labor as human fertilizer haulers for the city's public parks. The irony was not lost on the court. The men who had intended to cultivate luxury were now destined to nurture the very greenery they had once sought to dominate. As the guards escorted the disgraced lords away, Kaelen turned his attention to Elara. "You saw the life in a handful of dirt," he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Now, let me show you how the world blooms for you." He led her through the newly transformed Imperial Gardens, a riot of color and fragrance that had been meticulously restored over the past few weeks. The gardens had been designed by Kaelen himself, a fusion of traditional Chinese aesthetics and the raw, untamed beauty of the Verdant Pulse. Rare orchids bloomed alongside ancient pines, and cascading waterfalls flowed through meticulously sculpted rockeries. "This," Kaelen announced, gesturing to a particularly stunning grove of luminous moonflowers, "will be your apothecary. A sanctuary for healing, a place where knowledge and nature intertwine." He presented her with a deed, detailing her complete ownership of the gardens and the surrounding lands. It was a lavish gift, a statement of faith that bordered on the absurd a humble gardener, transformed into a benefactor of the imperial court. As she signed the document, a wave of gratitude and disbelief washed over her. Later, as they sat amongst the fragrant blossoms, sharing a simple tea prepared by Alara, Jian, the young scholar who had witnessed the initial revelation, spoke with a hushed awe. "The sphere," he said, referring to the blue-green sphere that had once connected Kaelen to the forest's wisdom. "It's stable now. It simply radiates a gentle, reassuring light." Kaelen nodded, picking up the sphere. "The earth remembers," he murmured. And this time, the words felt less like a warning and more like a promise. A promise that the ancient power, the sovereign of the forest, would continue to watch over the empire, a silent guardian, rooted deep in the heart of the land. Chapter 15. Echoes of the Pulse. The rain had ceased, leaving the imperial gardens shimmering with an iridescent sheen. Alara, now seated in her newly established apothecary, a fragrant haven carved into the hillside beneath the luminous moonflowers, felt a profound shift within her. The initial shock of Kaelen's revelation, the sheer audacity of his transformation, had settled into a quiet, exhilarating acceptance. The air hummed with the subtle energy of the Verdant Pulse, a current that seemed to flow not just through the meticulously arranged flora, but through her very being. Kaelen, ever observant, was meticulously analyzing a rare fern, its fronds unfurling with an almost unsettling speed. "The Earth's response is amplified," he observed, his voice a low rumble. "The root-bound state it isn't merely a channeling of energy. It's a conversation. The forest speaks through the ground, and I, for a brief moment, am able to understand." He turned to her, a small, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "You suspected, didn't you? The way I handled the dying willow, the way I coaxed the peonies to bloom out of season, it wasn't just skill, Alara. It was reciprocity." Alara, still wrestling with the implications of his power, nodded slowly. "I saw the way the water seemed to respond to your touch, like a lost child finding its mother." She instinctively reached for a vial of freshly harvested lavender oil, the scent a familiar comfort, but the shattering of the guard's armor that was beyond anything I could have imagined. Suddenly, Jian, the young scholar, entered, carrying a scroll and looking distinctly flustered. "Lord Kaelen," he exclaimed, bowing deeply, "I have received a communication from the Grand Magistrate. A delegation from the northern provinces, concerned about the incident at the Imperial Palace, has arrived. They demand an explanation, claiming your actions represent a destabilizing influence on the Empire." Kaelen's face remained impassive as he took the scroll. He scanned the elegant calligraphy, a slight furrow in his brow. "Typical," he murmured, folding the scroll neatly. "Fear manifests as demands. They fear what they don't understand, and they seek to control what they cannot." He rose, his movements fluid and purposeful, and walked towards the central basin of the gardens, a place where a miniature waterfall cascaded into a jade-colored pool. He knelt, his hand gently skimming the surface. The sphere, a perfectly smooth opalescent orb, pulsed with a brighter, more confident light. "The sphere is strengthening," he announced, his voice resonating with a strange, ancient quality. "The connection is becoming more stable, more resonant. With each interaction with the earth, with each acknowledgement of the forest's power, it grows." He held the sphere aloft, and a ripple spread across the water, creating a shimmering vortex. For a fleeting moment, the air thickened with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. a tangible echo of the forest's ancient wisdom. This, Kaelen said, his gaze fixed on the sphere, is not merely about power. It's about balance. The Empire thrives on control, on the suppression of natural forces. But nature, Elara, is a force of immense power. To deny it, it is to invite disaster. Just then, a low rumble echoed through the gardens. The earth beneath their feet vibrated subtly, and the luminous moonflowers pulsed with an intensified glow. Kaelen didn't flinch. He simply closed his eyes, extending his hand towards the ground. "The root-bound state is calling again," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not a reaction to fear. It's a response to disruption." As he spoke, the ground beneath the miniature waterfall erupted in a geyser of water and displaced soil. Not a destructive torrent, but a carefully controlled release, a gentle reminder of the Earth's enduring power. Around the base of the waterfall, a cluster of rare blue moss began to unfurl, its delicate tendrils reaching out as if seeking nourishment. Elara watched, mesmerized, as Kaelen remained kneeling, his hand still pressed against the earth. He didn't appear to be consciously exerting himself. It was as if he was simply listening. The sphere pulsed brighter, and the air filled with a clear, almost audible resonance. Then, he slowly withdrew his hand. "They are coming," he said, his eyes narrowed. "Not just the northern delegation. Others. Those who fear the consequences of a restored balance. The echoes of the pulse they are attracting attention." He looked at Elara, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "We will have to be vigilant, Elara. The fight for this land, for this connection, has only just begun."